This is Cold Start.
And for this episode, it's going to be the Pikes Peak Special.
We're here in June, and Pikes Peak is coming up soon, and it's the season for climbing the big hill in Colorado. So who better to tell us about it than our personally experienced and awarded Pikes Peak Hill Climb winner, Sylas.
Well, been there once, but within that single experience of going and competing at the Pikes Peak International Hill Climb, there was a lot to learn. And it's such a cool race, and I feel like there's so many people, especially in the United States, that know nothing about it. It's the second longest running race in the US, only behind the Indy 500.
That's incredible.
But not a lot of people know anything about it. It happens once a year, so they only run Pikes Peak once. It's not like any other series where there's multiple events throughout the season. It's a one and done. You go there to fight the mountain. You have one shot at it.
One shot seems appropriate. It's one of these things like how not to die on a mountain. Don't drive up as fast as you can. Oh, wait, let's make a race out of it and see what happens.
But that's what's cool. There's no guardrails in certain places. You're racing to over 14,000 feet above sea level, and it's this little mountain road. It is a public road. It's a toll road where you can drive to the top of Pikes Peak. And that's how the road started. It was basically a tourist attraction. There was this whole thing of you can drive to the top of a mountain. You can drive to over 14,000 feet. And in Colorado, they have these sets of mountains. There's a handful of them called the 14ers, right, that exceed 14,000 feet above sea level. And that's how the road at Pikes Peak started. It was a way to get people attracted to going to Colorado Springs, which is just next to Pikes Peak, to come and drive to the summit. And then, of course, as anything happens of any interested individuals that love to drive cars, it turned into an event, turned into a race of who could drive to the top of the mountain the fastest. So the first event of the Pikes Peak International Hill Climb started in 1916, and it was supposed to attract people to come to this area and challenge one another of who could race to the top of Pikes Peak the fastest. And of course, back then it was all dirt.
Yeah, it's crazy if you think about, automobiles were still a really new thing in 1916. So take this to the next level. Not only are you going to get to the top of this thing, which is a hell of an adventure on and of itself, but now you're going to get up there as fast as you possibly can on this. Now let's be generous, call it a road. It's a dirt path that goes up the mountain. It was carved out of the mountain for tourists just to get up to the top. It was not an interstate.
Yeah, no, it's only a 2-lane road. In recent years, they did pave the course back in, I think, the early 2000s. But basically what had happened was it was dirt for a very, very long time. Then some environmentalists got involved because of erosion and things of that nature. They really pushed for the mountain to be paved to help stop a lot of that environmental impact. The interesting thing is that this push to pave the mountain, a lot of people would think like, oh, well, it makes it safer to race up, right? Like it's going to be safer rather than being dirt where you're sliding all over the place. But funny enough, everyone has the same mindset of paving Pikes Peak actually made it more dangerous.
Yeah, it made it way faster.
But going back, let's go rewind a little bit here. So if you were an individual and you wanted to go run Pikes Peak, and I hope that this episode really encourages people to get more involved in Pikes Peak and keep this race alive in America. So if you were interested in going and racing Pikes Peak, there is an application process. They only accept around 70 cars to run the mountain each year. So if there's 100 applicants, 30 aren't making the cut. So you have to send in an application with your vehicle, the build of the vehicle, ensure that it's not going to break down on the mountain or cause any sort of delays in the program. Then you also have to send a resume on yourself as a driver. Show that you know what you're doing. You're not going to send yourself off the mountain. You're not going to cause any delays in the program once again. So making sure that the car itself is up to the task and making sure that each driver is up to the task. And you have to send references and recommendations. And it's a pretty intense process, but if you're a racer and you've been racing enough, you'll have all the resources you need to be able to submit that application. This process usually happens the fall before the year that the race occurs. You'll hear back January, February, usually if you're in or not in. Now, once you're in, it's time to start prepping the car. So you only have a short period of time before you get to June to make sure that the car's running, you got all the things you need, crew's ready for the event, all that sort of stuff. And then June, that's when you start heading to Colorado.
And so you're developing your car. Where can you do testing? I think hill climb as a discipline isn't maybe widely known or understood here, not in the States at least. So how do you go about finding a place to test a car where the conditions might be at all relevant to what you're going to be racing up the mountain?
So funny enough, as road course racers, we always think like, oh yeah, go to a racetrack. Well, the thing with a racetrack is it's perfectly smooth. And a perfectly smooth surface really isn't going to replicate the conditions on a public road at Pikes Peak for the hill climb. So what a lot of racers do is they'll find shittier tracks. So one of them is Streets of Willow at Willow Springs. That's usually a pretty good test ground, pretty bumpy there, some, inconsistent conditions in the pavement, really helps replicate some of the undulation that's going to occur at Pikes Peak. Sebring could also be a candidate if you're on the East Coast. A lot of bumps there, doing a lot of suspension tuning. That's a big piece of Pikes Peak as well. We mainly did our testing at Sonoma Raceway. That's just kind of what we had in our backyard and made it easier for us to do testing. And you kind of make your best guess of what you need with the vehicle. Then you go to the mountain and you make the fine tunes there. There's also a track, I think it's Pikes Peak International Raceway, so PPIR, which is their local in Colorado Springs. Some people will go there to do last minute testing. It's just an additional option.
I guess you at least get some elevation there, right? Compared to Sonoma, where you're maybe a couple hundred feet above sea level.
Right. And for us coming from the West Coast and coming from California, that was our biggest concern of going to the mountain. So when I did my attempt at Pikes Peak in 2023, when we went, we signed up for all the available testing that we could. And so that's, I think, an interesting thing that not a lot of people know about is there is testing opportunities on the mountain prior to race week, which everyone knows more about race week and the qualifying sessions and then the main event that happens towards the end of the month. But I don't think a lot of people know that you can sign up for 2 weekends or 3 weekends prior to the main event to go and test on the mountain.
So you can get out there and get a sample of what you're probably in for. Again, weather notwithstanding, changing conditions, all those kind of things. But you at least get on the course. You have an opportunity to experience, how wide is this road? How tight are these turns? What are sight lines going to be like? Are you able to go up at different times of the day so you can see, might there be sun shining in my eyes going in this section or something like that?
Exactly. There's a lot of information absorption and download during those test events. Even before we put our vehicle on the mountain, we went to a local tuning shop in Colorado Springs and put the car on a dyno. So like you're talking about the altitude, even though Colorado Springs is, 5,000 feet above sea level, so you're not even at the 8,000 feet for the starting line, but at least gave us a baseline. We ensured that the motor could operate at that altitude, and then also looking at how much horsepower we were making, any additional tuning we needed to do, making sure, this transmission was working properly, and all of that stuff looked good. Now, whenever you test on the mountain, it's always split up into sections. So the first weekend, it was only split up into 2 sections, the bottom section and the top section. For the first weekend, the weather was such that the top section was always closed. Everyone was forced to be on the bottom section. And the bottom section was also damp. So the main focus for the first weekend for me was translating all of the testing I had done on the simulator and applying that to real life. So does this corner look like it did on the computer? What's coming up? Trying to remember which corner comes after which corner to not get lost.
Oh, that's cool. Is that iRacing or R-Factor or something that has a Pikes Peak course that you could actually drive up the mountain?
So I used Assetto Corsa.
Oh, right.
So that was a free download off the internet to download Pikes Peak. And it's a decent download. A lot of the same visual references that are in that download or in that simulator are in real life. So things like guardrails, street signs, porta potties, sounds funny, but it actually is true, is replicated in that simulation and are things that you can use as references. Now, when I went to practice, I would do different sections and I would run the race or run the hill climb about 2 to 3 times a night, 3 times a week for 2-3 months. And my main thing was just memorizing, is this a fast corner, slow corner, big braking zone, kind of finding those big alert corners where people have gone off in the past because they don't recognize it or don't recall it. And so my biggest thing was just ensuring to not make a big mistake, not miss a braking zone for a really tight corner. And then once we actually got the car on the mountain, figure out those fine tunes of where to push, where not to push. Obviously, going there for my first time, main objective is make it to the race and make it to the top of the mountain. I mean, memorizing the course was the main objective. It's 156 turns in 12 miles, which, if you think about it, is fairly comparable to like the Nürburgring.
The Nürburgring, right? That's exactly what I was thinking about.
And so it was more like memorizing the 156 turns, ensuring I was confident with where I was going. So when I got there, I could think about more of driving the car that we were bringing, which was going to require a lot of attention and focus, and not be able to have to, really think about the course itself.
So that's, I'm going to have to do quick math here, but like 12, 14 turns per mile going up the mountain. Is that about right?
It's a lot. Like there's no real break on the mountain. There is a couple areas where you get to go fast. I wouldn't necessarily call them like straightaways. You can't compare a mountain hill climb course to a road course by any means.
Not
it's
at all.
Its own thing.
Yeah, well, will people talk about turn numbers, or is it more of just like sectors, parts of the course? I mean, how do people refer to those reference places to each other? Are they named?
The corners are named, and usually people will just talk about, the bigger named corners and reference off of that. You also do have like the lower section, the middle section, and the upper section. So this first weekend, like I was talking about of testing on the mountain, it was only split into two. And then as we went into the second weekend of testing, then it was split into three sections. So then you would run the bottom section, the middle section, and the top section. Now, to compare the two sections versus the three, the top section on the first weekend was the combination of the middle section and the upper section. So the middle section and the top section are usually considered the more complicated sections. Now, if I were to describe each section to you and try to translate it into like a road course, the bottom section is more high speed, flowing corners. You can pretty much, what I would say, rally the bottom section, meaning you could visually see the corner that was coming up. Nothing really surprises you on the bottom section. And it's fast. It's very fast. Especially like the first section of corners, right off the starting line, you're thrown into like high commitment, high speed corners, and you're like, here we go, it's happening. So once you get done with the bottom section and you transition to the middle section, which the identifier for that is the brake check booth. There's a brake check booth about halfway down the mountain or halfway up the mountain, depending on how you look at it, where they legitimately will check your brake temperature if you're in a street car to ensure that you don't lose brakes on the mountain when you're a tourist.
So hold up. You're driving up or down the mountain. I guess they don't need to check on the way up. They need to check on the way down.
Down, yeah.
Okay, so this is like those signs you'll see on those big grades that are warning truckers. There's runaway areas for the truck because their brakes might overheat or their brake fluid might boil and they'd have nothing. And if there weren't these runaway areas, they would just go crashing into whatever's below.
Right. And once again, the brake check is at the bottom of the middle section. And that middle section is all the switchbacks, the W's, as they call them. And so when you're coming down the mountain, and if you're a tourist in your streetcar, you have a big tendency to ride the brakes because there's all these hairpins. And when you're driving down the mountain, when you're driving through these hairpins, you're basically just looking at blue sky because there's no guardrails, no protection, straight off a cliff. And so people are scared and they want to slow down. So there is legitimately a brake check booth. There will be a volunteer ranger that will come out, or a park ranger that'll come out of the booth with like
a pyrometer?
With a heat sensing gun, and will point it at your rotors. And if you're within a certain parameter, you'll have to pull over, be in a 10, 15 minute timeout, let your brakes cool down before you can continue down the mountain. Now, conveniently, they also place a souvenir shop right at this location as well. So while you're waiting for your brakes to cool down, you can buy a Pikes Peak t-shirt, some plushies, get some nachos, something like that. So
those bumper stickers that says, I drove Pikes Peak hill climb and my brakes almost overheated, so I had to buy this bumper sticker.
Right. So middle section now, right after the brake check booth, middle section, that's all categorized by just switchbacks and sharp hairpins. So the middle section is very much stop and go. And that's where if you have a lot of power, you're able to put it to the ground. If you're all-wheel drive, especially the electric vehicles, they'll dominate this middle section. And with the middle section, the bottom section, you could rally it. You can visualize, you can see the corner coming up. For the middle section, what benefited me in learning the course was you memorize how many left turns and right turns you go through. So it's like, okay, the first two rights, that connection to the next left, the first one's going to be flat, and you can hold it flat until you get to the left. And then as you switch back to the left, switch back to the right, the next one, that's when Evo corner comes up. So this is where people can get tricked up in the W's is everything looks the same because all you're doing is just driving to another hairpin into another hairpin into another hairpin. And if you lose track of these little connectors, one of them is flat. It's blind around a corner, but it's flat. And then the next one is famously Evo corner. And that's where the Evo sent it off and flipped, I don't know how many times off the mountain. Luckily, both individuals were okay. And that Evo is actually in the Pikes Peak Museum, which is located in Colorado Springs. And you can see that car that's all mangled up.
That's a Mitsubishi Evo?
Yes.
Okay.
And so it's really easy to get lost in the W's. And for me, I just memorized, this happens first and this happens second. You kind of keep track of how many lefts and how many rights you went through. Now, as you get to the top of all these switchbacks and you get to Devil's Playground, that's what they call it, Devil's Playground.
What a good name.
That's the end of the middle section, the start of the upper section. Now, in this upper section, we're running the ridge line of the mountain now. So the W's, the middle section, we climbed a lot in a short period of time. Now, after Devil's Playground, we're kind of running the ridge line, getting to the final climb to the summit. And running those ridge lines, it's very fast. So we have fast corners, a lot of time to gain on the top section. But similar to the middle section, there's a handful of corners that look the same. And they're these blind left-hand corners that you're wrapping around the mountain and you can't see around, obviously, the mountain face. And they all look the same. And one of them you can hold flat, one of them you can't, one of them's a descending radius, it tightens up. So if you lose track of where you're at, really easy to send it off the mountain there. And then you have the final switchbacks to get to the top of the mountain. The final characteristic of this top section, and you talked about it about weather and how that affects the roadway and things of that nature, the top section is always the bumpiest section. The bottom is really smooth, really fast. Middle section also really smooth, but slow. Upper section, fast and bumpy.
I kind of picture parts of the mountain crumbled down over time. There's little landslides and things that must happen. So are there rocks and boulders and stuff that wind up on the course?
Yeah, that can happen, especially in these first couple weekends of the testing that happens in early June.
They shake stuff loose.
It's race cars rumbling the mountain. And obviously street cars aren't going to shake or reverberate as much. And as the first handful of cars go up the mountain, any sort of loose rock is going to fall off. And they're pretty good about listening to drivers. Like if you get to the top of a section during a practice run and you say, hey, I saw some gravel or some stuff here or there, they're really good at pausing it, cleaning it up, and then resuming it again. Usually by the time you get to race week, which is at the end of the month, not that many rocks are falling off. But this upper section, why it's so bumpy and it starts to articulate, the top of the mountain obviously is freezing and thawing and freezing and thawing and freezing and thawing over the season. And so what happens is that pavement will contract and expand, contract and expand. And as it freezes and melts underneath it, it'll start moving it and it'll undulate. And so the top section of Pikes Peak is never the same. So year after year, the top always changes. And so when you practice the top section, which is probably the most important to practice, you're just looking for where the bumps are. And so you have this 2-lane road, right? The lane to go up the hill, the lane to go down the hill. And you'll just look okay, there's a big bump there, so I need to jump in the left lane to avoid it, but I need to get back to the right before that bump to set up for the corner and all that sort of stuff. So it's almost like you're looking to analyze the surface. And even when you're testing the top section, as you're coming back down the mountain after each test run, you'll also swerve into the other lane to test bumps and make sure that you can find everything that might disrupt the car. Because obviously you don't want to break any sort of drive shafts or half shafts. And also you don't want to upset the car enough where it launches you off the side of the mountain. So once again, the top section is one of the most important. When I went, the weather never permitted us to practice the top section until it was race week. and I got to practice it one day. And I did 3 runs in the top section, and I was like, okay, we need to stop because I don't want to break anything. It started getting pretty aggressive of me trying to push and go faster and faster, where I was like, I don't want to hit a bump wrong and the car bounce and it's going to disrupt the transmission or disrupt the rear end or anything like that. And we actually called it a short day just because of those reasons of, we got a race in 2 days and I don't want us to break something and have to fix it before we go up the mountain for race day. So that's kind of the digest of the mountain of bottom section, middle section, and upper section.
What kind of tires are most of the cars running on? Because partly I think you need some kind of, like off-road rally kind of tire, but if you want to go as fast as you can, are you on a slick tire?
Yeah, you're on slicks for sure. When we went, we had slicks, we carved intermediates, and you're mandated by the series to bring a set of reins.
Okay, so
just in case.
There'll be a grooved tire somewhere in the mix, but you might not run on it unless the conditions require it.
Hey, I mean, if you're going for a record and you're going for the win, you got to run slicks. And so the main thing that you're looking for on Pikes Peak is a tire that can switch on very quickly. You don't have 2 warm-up laps or a warm-up lap that you would normally have at a road course. You got to get those tires working in 2 to 3 corners to have the confidence to push and be able to put down a time that's going to be respectable.
Unreal. And is there an allowance for tire warmers? Can you run those before you go out on the track?
You can. So you can run tire warmers. There is this kind of a debate of the people that usually run tire warmers are like the big manufacturer teams, the people that are bringing millions of dollars, and it's kind of like, if you're true grassroots racer, you don't run tire warmers. But, I mean, obviously there's a huge benefit to tire warmers, and a lot of the records that are set there, there's no way that they could set those records without tire warmers.
Yeah, I guess some of that bravado must come along with, and you didn't die, so you do what you got to do.
Yeah, I mean, that's what attracted me to the event of wanting to go and do it is, once again, it's one of these last true forms of motorsports where your life's in your own hands. I mean, if you want to be stupid and make a mistake and go off the side of a mountain, there's some real risk there. Safety is a main priority of Pikes Peak, and it's to their testament that most of the incidents that have occurred with cars in recent years have led to 0 or minor injuries.
That's unreal. There's other considerations for safety regarding the equipment you have. You also need to run oxygen in these cars, right? Because I can imagine from 8 to 14,000 feet, you need to be able to breathe.
Yeah, so it's not mandated. So you don't have to run oxygen. It actually took a long time for them to approve the use of oxygen. And that can also be a piece of why some of the incidents occurred in years past was what can happen at altitude is basically brain fog.
Delirium, yeah.
And that's a big piece of forgetting where you're at on the mountain. If you misjudge a single corner, there's big consequences. And it's one of those things where those people weren't running oxygen back then, and their brain might not have been operating at its peak performance. No pun intended, Pikes Peak. Peak performance.
I see what you did there.
They made a mistake. And so now running oxygen is a lot more popular. So I did run oxygen. Obviously, if you can have any sort of additional benefit, why not take it, especially your first year? And I think Pikes Peak might be one of, if not the only racing series that allows compressed oxygen to be in the car.
That can add to the safety of the car in any way.
Right. And that was their hesitation of permitting it to be in the vehicles because obviously, compressed oxygen, it's, a bomb essentially. It can ignite on fire very, very easily. And so there's a lot of requirements of how that bottle needs to be mounted and needs to be secure, needs to be in certain locations, stuff like that. But yeah, we did run oxygen, and, I did run some of the first test days when we were up there without oxygen just to kind of see. And once again, like I'm also a big proponent of not running cool suits and things like that. So I'm half crazy anyway of like, no, it's got to be a raw experience. I want to see what it's about and like what I can do.
I think half is a generous estimate.
And, but when it came to the race and, the weeks leading up to the race, it's just, why not? Especially on the middle and the upper section, there's no reason not to, right? There's no disadvantage of having oxygen other than you have to run these tubes through your helmet and into your nostrils. And the first couple times it was very uncomfortable of this additional thing happening in your helmet. But then once you get used to it, It's fine.
There's something there with brain fog. I can only imagine they have this condition. They probably call it like mountain madness, right? You go up high enough and there's not enough oxygen getting to your brain, so it clouds your judgment. You start making bad decisions. And oh, wait, we connected up the oxygen. Oh, wait, that was the NOS.
Yeah, that wouldn't end very well. But yeah, I mean, altitude sickness is very, very real. And that was another benefit for us going our first year of joining these early practice days that happen in the beginning of June. Is we're there for a month. And so we're getting acclimated to the altitude and getting more used to it. Obviously, the locals have a little bit more of a benefit to it than we do because they're used to
They're
living
acclimated,
at altitude. But yeah, so beginning of June are these test days that occur. When you're running test days at the mountain, your schedule is insane. And that's something like not a lot of people talk about unless you're like on the inside circle, is what a test day looks like on the mountain. So basically, each of these test days that happen, you're running a single section. Now, to get to your section, you line up at the entry gate, the toll booth, to get onto the mountain at 3:30 a.m. So you're waking up at 2 a.m. to load up the trailer, load up your gear, make sure you have everything, try to have breakfast. You need to wake up super early, get in line, so then you can get a good parking stall at whatever your section is. And so all the racers will start to line up around 3:30 a.m. and they won't open the gates until I think 5 a.m. or 4:45. Usually they open it up early because enough people line up that it'll go down the hill and onto like the local street at the bottom, and they have to like start moving vehicles up. And so it's pitch black. And so you're driving up the mountain pitch black with your tow rig and your race trailer. Now there's an additional challenge to Pikes Peak, is driving up part of the mountain to get to whether it's the bottom section or the middle section or the top section. You have to drive, in some cases, the race course with your truck and trailer, with the race car and the trailer. If you're running the top section, you have to drive the bottom and the middle section of Pikes Peak to get to the paddock for the top section.
So you have some big hauling vehicle, like some dually or something, and your trailer behind it, and you have to drive that up the mountain.
Yeah. And so, like we were talking about, the middle section, the W's, the switchbacks, you have to drive those with your tow rig and trailer.
Holy crap, man.
And so you'll get to your base. So whether that's the parking lot and the main base for where the start line is for the bottom section, you'll set up at where that brake check booth, like we talked about, that'll be the starting line for the middle section, or you drive up to Devil's Playground and park in the dirt there, and that's the start of the upper section. So you'll get parked up and, it's 5 a.m., still pitch black, right? Everything's dark. Everyone's trying to park these tow rigs, kind of chaos of, I need to get here, there, over here. Everyone's trying to get their positioning. Everyone's unloading all these cars. It's just wild of like early in the morning, there's all this action going on. Everyone's wearing headlamps to like see what they're doing. It's wild. It's a wild, wild scene. And, you'll get everything out of the trailer. You'll start warming up the vehicle, doing all the preparations that you need. You'll have a driver's meeting every morning, and they'll make sure that everyone that needs to be there is there because you're assigned to a different section. So they make sure that people didn't go to the wrong sections, that they're not missing anyone. Because once the first runs start, the mountain's closed. So if you didn't make it on the mountain in time, you're not getting up to the bottom section. You're obviously not going to, if you're running the middle or the top section, everything gets locked down.
And I imagine conversely, once you're on the mountain, you're not getting off until everybody else is done.
Oh yeah. Yeah, you're stuck. And so the first runs will start when you can see, because you're not mandated to have headlights. And so they want to make sure that there's enough light. The sun might not be fully up yet, but there's enough light to start the first couple runs. And that'll usually be about 5:30. And the practice goes until 8:30. And you have to be packed up and off the mountain by 9 a.m. Because what happens at 9 a.m. is they'll open the mountain to tourists. Because it's the summer months. That's when most people want to go and drive Pikes Peak. And so that's why you have to get up there so early. Now, let me say something, and I can't express this enough. There's no other feeling than being on Pikes Peak, watching the sunrise and listening to the cars go up the mountain. And my favorite section to practice was the middle section, because where you're at the brake check booth and the parking lot, you can see a lot of the switchbacks up in front of you. And unfortunately, I had to drive. Not so unfortunately, but it would have been so cool because I was talking to my crew. They said that they could hear me all the way up in all the switchbacks. Obviously, the sound was a little bit delayed of what was actually happening, but you're basically in this like arena and the sound is just echoing off the mountain, and the colors of the sunrise and the beautiful pinks and all this stuff, like it's just unbelievable. And so the practice mornings are just magical. Not to mention, like, you're telling yourself, like, I'm running Pikes Peak and doing this event and how unbelievable all these things are. But so that's why the schedule is so crazy at Pikes Peak is the toll road's not closed. They're going to open it up at 9 a.m. and you better be off and out of the way before then.
So everybody's a little delirious from the thinner oxygen or the thinner air that's up there. And wow, that's a crazy scene. So everything's super compressed. You got to get up there, you do your runs, and you hurry up because tourists are coming.
Yeah. And so the sleep schedule is another one of the challenges of Pikes Peak. So we got pretty used to, we would run our test days, we'd go back to where our home base was, work on the car if we needed to, you take a nap, you sleep, and then you wake up, have food, and then you go back to sleep again. So you kind of had these like 2 work days basically, just to be able to like get enough sleep because yeah, you got to wake up at 2 a.m. And be ready to rock and roll. And as a driver, I mean, how challenging that is to like find your peace in your zone when you're just like, my body doesn't work this way. This isn't time to be up and be awake. But yeah, so like that's the cadence of these test days of early mornings. You're running the car. You're trying to get as many sessions in as possible. You're practicing either that lower section, the middle section, or the upper section. And then you're hoping that you don't burn your brakes off your tow rig as you come back down the mountain. And it's a pretty wild scene. And like I said, not a lot of people get to see it because it's happening earlier in the month and, not a lot of people talk about it.
And that sleep schedule affects obviously your whole crew, right? So you have this whole group of people that are having to live this life of going to bed at a weird time, getting up at strange times, forcing themselves to nap or whatever else it is. If they're not busy off working on the car, fixing something that was broken, getting new brakes for the tow rig, whatever it might need along the way.
Yeah, no, it's intensive. Just like endurance races are challenging everyone, Pikes Peak does the same. Even though it's not an endurance race by any means, there's all these other challenges that go into it of dealing with altitude, not only for the car, but for your crew, dealing with the crazy schedule. Like if you're not ready for that, it can bite you pretty quick. Now, so there's these test days early in the month. Then we get to the race week, which more people know about the actual race week. That's when things start getting a little bit more televised, recorded, video starts coming out, things like that. So that's the week before June 22nd. And so that week, they'll have, I think, 3 or 4 test days, a break, and then race. So now for those 4 test days, each group is broken up into different sections. And when you run that section now, it's your qualifying. So whenever you're running the bottom section, once your group gets shifted around to running the bottom, that'll be your qualifying day. So all the qualifying is done on the lower section of the track. Makes sense. High speeds, good commitment, good average of performance that you're looking for out of the mountain. So during race week, it's kind of straight into it.
I think I was reading about a famous racer who's done this, part of a famous family that's run this race for years and years. And it said that he at top speed in one section hit 140 miles an hour in an open wheel car. I have to imagine that's the lower section.
Yes. Yeah, lower section is probably where you're going to see your highest speed on the mountain. And 140, yeah, that's kind of it. And that's another testament of like, there really isn't that long of straightaways. It's a lot of corners and it's a lot of sweeping turns. So 140 is kind of the top end. I think our top speed that we hit on the mountain was maybe 130.
So it's kind of like if you took Sonoma Raceway and you tilted it so that it was vertical instead of horizontal across the plain.
Yeah. Yeah. No, it's crazy. I mean, it's nonstop. It is intense focus for those 12 miles and 156 turns.
Man, I knew you were like a risk taker. I didn't realize you were that crazy.
I didn't know. I really didn't know what I was signing myself up for. I mean, when we went and did this, it was just kind of wild idea. And we're like, yeah, we might not get accepted our first year, whatever. We'll keep trying again. And I mean, we were even surprised of, oh, we're going. Like we we got a lot of work to do to get this car ready and do some different modifications and make it ready for Pikes Peak. And even for myself of, intense workout schedule, trying to not, I didn't necessarily do like oxygen depriving workouts or anything like that, but just making sure that you're fit and being able to deal with the altitude and not being able to lose focus. And that was a lot of that sim work too, of just running the mountain over and over and over again and ensuring that you're not making a mistake and you know where you're going. Trying to put as much of the mountain into your subconscious as possible so you don't have to think so hard, because I mean, you'll run out of mental capacity pretty quick when you're out there.
Did you develop any like tricks or mnemonics to remember parts of the course or sections? I guess when you talk about the Nürburgring, there's these little phrases people have for the section called miss, hit, miss, right? Where there's these 3 apexes in a row and you kind of don't want to hit the first or the last one, but you hit the middle one.
For me, I'm a very visual driver. Like, even when I drive places like Sonoma, a lot of people think about, oh, point at this obstacle in the distance and things of that nature. I've never used any of those references. I've always been just looking at the track, and it either looks correct or it doesn't look correct. And so for Pikes Peak, when I went into that, it was just kind of, this section looks like this and it's going to lead into this corner, and basically just memorized it of this comes after this and this is the next thing. And all that was just lap after lap after lap. And if I made a mistake, I started over again until I didn't make a mistake and did the next section, not make a mistake. And especially for those W's, like I talked about in the middle section, it was just memorization. There really wasn't anything about it. It was just kind of, this turn comes before that turn and it looks this way, and this one has this rock formation and things like that. It was just the visual comprehension of each corner, and it looks the way it does. And I don't know. It's interesting.
This is crazy.
So it really served me well, because when we went to the mountain, I felt really confident. And the top section was probably where I didn't feel the most confident. And we only got one practice day. And that was the only section I had like a bobble or a scare, was the top section, which also led us to calling it early to ensure that we didn't do anything to the car.
You have the furthest to fall too.
Yeah. And it's big consequences there and big rock gardens. And so even if you're not falling far, you're going to hit a really big boulder if you go off. And so, and of course, our mindset going into it was just make it to the top. Like, even people talk about Pikes Peak, a lot of the competitors, their objective is to reach the summit. They're not even going for an overall time. They just want to make it to the top. And that's success in and of itself, is making it without failure, without making a driver mistake, with having a mechanical failure, without overheating. There's all these things that come in of making it to the summit of Pikes Peak is success in and of itself. And so we didn't go there with any sort of time target, and we really didn't want to like push things. We just wanted to prove that we could succeed in finishing. And a lot of people always say when you go there, and especially for your rookie year, really focus on you're racing the mountain. You're not racing your competitors, because if you're going off the line early in the sequence, your conditions might be different than the conditions later on. The mountain will continually change. And so some people might have damp runs or low visibility runs, and other people might have perfectly sunny runs. You just never know what you're going to get. So you got to drive your car to your conditions for your run and not really focus about the other competitors.
You said it was just over 12 miles. Is that right, to the top?
Yeah.
Okay, so 12 miles, and I guess a benchmark for running this race, people talk about whether you're sub 10 minutes these days. Like, that's a huge milestone. If you could be under 10 minutes, like you're doing it. Like, you're on a winning path.
Yeah, the 10-minute barrier is like the big goal for a lot of people, is to do a sub 10. Now, the sub 10 or the 10-minute barrier really came into play when the course was still all dirt. And that was like, who could break the 10-minute barrier first for the overall victory? Like, it was this big achievement of who could do a sub 10 first. And obviously there was people that were able to break that barrier on all dirt. And now as it became pavement, it's a kind of a middle ground achievement for a lot of people. Like, if you can do a sub 10 at Pikes Peak, you're really doing something. Obviously the records and stuff like that, there's even sub 9s now. So when you're talking about like being the king of the mountain, you're talking in, the 8-minute range.
That's incredible. Nobody talks about a 10-minute lap at the Nürburgring like it's a thing. I mean, 10 minutes, like you got around it. Maybe you were driving a rental car or something pretty slow, right?
Yeah, I
This is
think
so.
isn't the Nürburgring like a 9-minute lap? Like that's if you can do a sub 9, like that's a pretty big barrier.
I think that's considered to be. I mean, the records are now below 7, which is just crazy.
Yeah, yeah.
But to put in different perspective, right? That's more than a mile a minute up a mountain. So 60
Right.
miles an hour is a mile a minute, right? So you're averaging well above that.
Yeah, and to think about it in comparison to the Nürburgring, I mean, there is no long, massive straightaway where you could potentially reach close to 200 miles an hour. It's all twisty, windy switchbacks. And going to that altitude, your car is losing power. You will significantly lose power from the starting line to the finishing line.
I mean, you're driving up a mountain, right? This isn't a prepared road course with barriers and runoffs and things like that. Like the Nürburgring is treacherous, right? It's a hard course and they open it to the public and so forth once in a while. But it's nothing compared to driving up a mountain where you can go flying off the side, where boulders can come fall at you, where there might be rain or snow or ice in parts of it and not on the other parts, where the driver before you might have had something happen to their car and they left some remnants behind that are not apparent to anybody until the next driver gets up there.
Exactly. Yeah, it's always changing condition. I mean, you kind of have to drive the mountain like a rally driver, which I've never done rally, but I would assume that's like you kind of leave a little bit on the table just because of potentially changing conditions. That's kind of the same way. Like you never know what you're going to get around the next corner. So as much as you want to go fast and drive hard, you do drive the mountain different than you would a road course of leaving a little bit on the table if you need to make adjustments or there's a potential issue on the course here or there. Now, if there's any major issue on your run, they can call it off and you'll redo your run. If there's like a car that goes off or oil that gets laid down or something like that, they'll basically freeze the mountain. And once you come around a corner station, there might be someone waving a red flag or something like that. You'll come to a stop there. They'll let you know kind of what's going on and they can send you back down the mountain. You could be 3/4 of the way done with your run and something might occur that has to close the mountain and you got to go all the way back to the beginning and try again. So you might have a record-setting run and if something happens, you got to do it again.
And the logistics of that are you have to wait for the other runs to happen, right? Because you can't go back down the mountain until they open that up again for you, right?
They'll freeze all the cars. They'll stop everyone. So basically, there's about like 3, potentially 4 cars on the mountain at once running. So they'll separate it out pretty far. But yeah, so say if the first car of these 3, let's call it 3, first car of the 3 cars in the mountain goes off, there's an incident, they'll red flag the mountain. And so those other 2 cars will reach a corner where there'll be a flag. They'll stop and they'll make sure that they turn all the cars around at the same time and they'll go back down the mountain and restart.
Wow, that's really impressive logistics and coordination that they have to do to be able to
Yeah.
pull this off. And it's all just radios, I'm guessing.
Radio communication, some of those systems like I talked about that are internal in the cars as well. And I mean, it could be something like there's animals on the course, like the bighorn sheep, they'll get on the course. And if someone sees that that happens, they'll stop the runs. When we did some test runs when the mountain was just for tourists and we took our rental cars, and that's what a lot of racers do is even when you're done with your test sessions, you'll jump in your rental car and you'll just keep driving up and down the mountain, just trying to memorize and look and absorb as much as you can, like a track walk, but you're not walking up Pikes Peak. And we got to see some of the bighorn sheep that were on the side of the road. And it's like, yeah, that thing would mess up a car for sure. And so even stuff like that. So whether it's wildlife, if it's rocks, oil, if a car blows up and it's stranded in a bad location, all reasons to go red and send cars down the mountain.
It puts a completely different perspective on this stuff. You know, I've watched that, I don't know if you call it a documentary, the film that was called Climb Dance, that I guess it was Peugeot put together, and you're on board for parts of it and you're seeing these shots of this car just like hurtling up the mountain. And this was still when it was dirt, but just incredible to see the sights and the weather and the fog and the sight lines from the mountain and what could go wrong if things go wrong. You got to live that.
Yeah, no, it was an unbelievable experience. I think it was by far the coolest thing I've ever done in a car. And everyone talks about whenever you run Pikes Peak, you always want to go back. It's one of those things where it's always in you. And like if I were to give up racing anything else just to do Pikes Peak year after year, I would absolutely do that. It's such a crazy magical place in those early mornings and the experience and the people that do it. it's such a tight-knit community that was so cool to be a part of. I mean, I'm always itching to go back. I'm always hopeful that maybe next year we get to go back, or the year after that, maybe we can make a plan or something like that. It was by far the coolest thing. Like there's a reason why that video, as old as it was, won a bunch of awards in film festivals. I mean, it's art. It is magical. It is so much more than just racing. It's really hard to describe. I mean, I would really encourage, if you've just now heard about Pikes Peak from this podcast, or you've heard about it but you've never gone, even go to be a spectator. I mean, it's unreal just to be on that mountain and watch cars go up it. And if you're a racer and you've been doing GT stuff or prototype stuff, or just standard road course racing, really look into that application process. And what's really cool nowadays is a lot of people think about Pikes Peak of these Pikes Peak specials. And that's why naming this episode the Pikes Peak special is, that's what everyone thinks about, of these specialized cars that go and run Pikes Peak. But nowadays, that's not really the case. They've really opened it up that if you have a GT4 class race car, there is a GT4 division that you can run in. Just like SRO or in IMSA, you can bring your BMW GT4 car or your Porsche GT4 or any GT4 class vehicle, and you can sign up and bring that to Pikes Peak.
That's really cool. So you get probably a good diversity of different types of cars, even though you think maybe there's certain characteristics that make cars better for this sort of endeavor. But to be able to bring, whatever kind of car you like racing or whatever, that's pretty cool. You might have a class of other cars up there doing the same thing.
Yeah, I mean, it's really run what you brung, right? I mean, obviously Ford brought the super van, that all-electric van, and they brought the Ford Lightning that they modified and did all. So that's like upper echelon, right? And I mean, we're talking millions and millions of dollars that's being pumped into that program. And then when I ran it, there was a guy from Japan that just loved Pikes Peak and wanted to do it. It was on his bucket list. And I think he had like a Pulsar or some like Japanese tiny hot hatch, like stock bodied. I don't even know what it was powered by, but it couldn't have been that high horsepower, like no wings on it, nothing. And he ran that, and he just always wanted to go up the mountain. And so you can kind of bring anything. A lot of the builds for Pikes Peak don't get a lot of attention or TV time because they're not super, super radical, or they're not the fastest thing on the mountain. But there's dudes bringing like stock Dodge Vipers and Ford Mustangs and Subarus. Like, that, you don't have to build anything crazy. You can bring a GT4 car and run the mountain. There was even, for a couple years, there was like the Yokohama series that was all Porsche GT4 Club Sport Cayman. I would love to see the entries go up and be strong, and also that the viewership and the people that go and attend Pikes Peak also increases. I just think it's such an unbelievable race that not enough people talk about, or consider going and doing, or watch in the US. And what's really, really cool is for this year, for 2025, it's actually going to be on live TV.
That's incredible. So if you want to learn more about this, it's, I think, PPIHC, right? The Pikes Peak International Hill Climb. I think that's their domain, ppihc.com. You can go online and read up about the race, learn about the history, and then this year you'll actually be able to watch it live. That's super cool.
Yeah, it's going to be on the Racer Network. So it's going to be on TV. Usually in the past, it was always streamed live on YouTube. Mobile One and some other sponsors would put on that live stream. I mean, back in the day, I think in like the 90s and the early 2000s, it used to be like on ESPN and stuff. Like it actually used to be on TV, and you could watch some really cool vintage footage of the hill climb. And I think back then it wasn't live. It was just like highlights, because there is a lot of downtime for the mountain. I mean, it is a long race day. So having the attention span to like watch the whole thing, it is somewhat difficult, but it's really cool that it's going to be on live on TV this year. So anyone that's listening that's interested of learning or watching more about Pikes Peak, Racer Network, June 22nd, 2025, it's going to be live on TV. And in the meantime, look up some cool footage on YouTube.
That's awesome. There have to be these fixed position camera stations, right, where they're waiting for cars to go up the mountain. But are there helicopters out there too while you're racing?
Yeah, so there's a film helicopter that'll follow vehicles up. They usually follow you to like the middle section, and then they have to like circle back and grab the next car. Unless it's a record-setting run, then they'll follow the car all the way to the summit. So the live stream is actually pretty good in regards to coverage. You can see a lot of the course, and I'm excited to see what they do this year, especially that they're going to be on live television. I'm sure they're going to up their number of cameras and angles and all that sort of stuff. I mean, there really isn't a bad angle on Pikes Peak. Watching a race car rip through the forest, and then even when you get above the tree line in the middle section where like trees aren't even able to survive because there's not enough oxygen, and it's just unbelievable landscape. And the year that I did it, the whole upper section was covered in snow. I mean, it was just crazy. Like the photos from it is just unbelievable. So it'll be really cool to watch it on TV this year. I wish I was on the mountain, but I love supporting the event because I just think it's so unbelievable.
I think we need to have more discussion about this because this is sort of a general primer, an overview of what it's like to be at Pikes Peak, what the race is about. But we need to tell people more about your story because Sylas is too humble to remind you that he was the Rookie of the Year in 2023 when he climbed the mountain for his first time ever at Pikes Peak. He was second in his class to very famous racers. There's a whole story to be told there. Story for another time, but I think we need to get to that one too.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I'll take any opportunity to continue to talk about Pikes Peak. And the Rookie of the Year award was just, such an honor to achieve. Realistically, you only have one shot at getting a Rookie of the Year award. And that's probably my biggest prized possession now is that, as a kid watching the race and having the Hot Wheels of the Pennzoil Tacoma Pikes Peak Special and all that stuff and admiring all of the people that have raced before me and through the years and being able to have a trophy like that is just absolutely insane. So I'd love to share that story and more of my insight of driving the mountain for the first time and, what that mental process was like and tackling the mountain and what happened in the upper section that scared us that we called it a little early and would love to share that story too. So,
oh, that's killer. Well, make sure you tune in to Pikes Peak Hill Climb this year. Watch it, learn about it, look at the history, go watch Climb Dance, go read about Sylas's expedition in 2023 where he won Rookie of the Year. There's so much cool stuff here. I think it makes me really interested in not just Pikes Peak, which is the top of the mountain, if you will, but all these other hill climb races that are around. A lot of them seem much more modest, but even some really famous ones, they don't climb all that high, but still the task of driving fast up a hill, right? At Goodwood, they do this at other places. It's sort of a cool activity. It's different than other kinds of racing that we know. It applies some of the techniques and the approaches, but it's its own thing completely. And
yeah,
I think it's undersold.
no, it's a different battle for sure. Most hill climbs, it's just tight and sketchy, and consequences are pretty big. When you drive on a road course, you got runoff, and you got walls, and you got tire packs, and safer barriers, and all these things that kind of keep you safe when you make a mistake. And whenever you do a hill climb, it's just like rally, where you can't make a mistake, because if you do, big consequences. Race is over.
Wow. I really appreciate you sharing this perspective on Pikes Peak. It's a unique one for sure. We have more to talk about on this for future episodes, no question. But this has been great. Thanks, Sylas.
Absolutely. I'll always be, big proponent of getting the Pikes Peak word out there and hopefully gaining more fans. Thanks for listening, Todd.
Hey, thanks for listening.